the Sensible SENCO. Welcome to my series on the Sensible SENCO. If you haven't done so already and have stumbled upon this video by accident, then you might want to check out the first video in the series. This is video 2 version 3 for those of you who've just taken on the SENCO role and are picking up from the Perfect SENCO. If this is not relevant to you, then check out one of the other videos instead. Version 5 is particularly useful if you're a SENCO who's been enrolled for a while and would like to freshen things up. I make no secret to the fact that the 5 videos are very similar, but each one has got a couple of differences. I have to admit that this is not a position I've ever been in, and personally it would probably be one of my worst nightmares. Imposter syndrome at its worst. You are going to have to live up to a set of expectations, and either you will conform to what is already in place, and if it's perfect then please take the easy ride and do exactly that, or you're going to have to be a strong, determined character who makes changes which are seen as being as valuable, if not better than, what is already in place. I follow a number of SENCOs on Twitter. Or is it that they follow me and I just followed back? Anyway, one of them recently advertised their own role at their school. They're taking a step back with a secondment into a training role for a year. For a hot second, I considered applying. What an amazing opportunity to work somewhere that has an outstanding provision, is known across the country for its innovative approaches to inclusion, and has a supportive leadership team, with money behind it as well. I then realised that the 2-hour drive each way daily was probably a bit far, and that I'd probably not enjoy trying to become a mini Mr. Perfect SENCO, so I bypassed the application process. I'm not a perfect SENCO by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a realist, and I actually quite like having problems to deal with. I struggle to live up to my own expectations sometimes, never mind those of someone who was perfect. I think there are different scenarios here though. Perhaps the previous SENCO has stepped down from the role and is still in the school. Even if they weren't great, you have to handle the situation delicately when making changes. Or maybe they've been promoted to the Trust SEN role or beyond. Maybe they were a much loved member of staff who has retired. They may have been perfect for the staff, but not necessarily perfect for the role. The picture on the slide is not without irony. Some SENCOs are the old-fashioned, cuddly type who parents and children love. They are nurturing and hands-on. The role of the SENCO has changed though, and now we are required to be more strategic and advisory than actionary. Schools who've had one of these SENCOs may believe they're perfect because children with SEN are her problem, not being sexist, and not theirs. If you saw my video about being a SENCO in a disaster zone, then you'll know sometimes it can be difficult to see the wood for the trees. The chances are that whilst everything might appear perfect on the surface in your school, it does have things which can be improved. I think schools are a little bit like buying a house. You can visit as many times as you like, daytime, evening, weekend, bank holidays, midweek. But it's only actually when you move in you spot the strange crack in the ceiling, the faulty wiring in the kitchen, and an ominous leak lurking in the conservatory. Can you guess what my house is like? A school, and specifically its SEN provision, is no different. You might see the swans gracefully gliding around delivering top quality interventions, only to discover that none of it has been recorded. No evidence. Or possibly worse, that when asked why they're delivering a certain intervention, the answer is, well, because we always do this. So your job will be to find the faults. There's bound to be something, even something little, and that should make you feel a little bit better. The school and its work may be ticking along nicely, but that doesn't mean you can't change it. You need to look at things and decide whether to keep it or kick it. Even if it really is perfect, you can't afford to ignore new research and ideas or to move along with the times. Leave things for too long and you risk staff becoming resistant to change alongside becoming stuck in your own ways, and then you're going to need to watch the 5th version of this video, dragging the dragons out of the Dark Ages. I have nothing against toe by toe, but the number of times someone will tell me that they always do toe by toe with someone flagged as having dyslexic difficulties drives me crazy. Closely followed by printing everything on yellow paper in Comic Sans size 14 point. When I'm doing demonstrations for EduKey's learning plans and provision maps, I often joke about Wellington Square, which is listed in their provision section. A Wellington Square is something I used over 20 years ago when I took on my first SENCO role, and I have to admit I found it lurking in the back of a few store cupboards since then. I'm a bit of a hoarder, no nasty comments allowed, and sometimes I'm quite glad. You'd be surprised how many children more recently have benefited from using resources that we now consider to be old. Equally so, if I'd stuck with delivering Wellington Square, I wouldn't have come across materials such as Dockside and the Butterfly book, which have proven to be suitable alternatives. So have a look at what's going on and decide whether to keep it or kick it. Just as our other SENCOs, you will need to set up your systems. If something already exists, great, but it doesn't mean you can't revamp things. Perhaps putting your own personality into any generic letters that get sent out, or initiating a weekly top 10 tips delivered on a postcard or bookmark at the start of the week. I'm very guilty of retaining a lot of information in my head. When I left my last position, it took me a good 2 months to dump my brain into a notebook for whoever took over. It wasn't that I didn't have records, I did, but I also had a lot of additional information about the children and their families that you only get by having been around for quite a while. For example, knowing that one parent went to special school and had a horrendous experience, so is very anti their child having any needs whatsoever. Anything needed to be brokered in such a way that it was their suggestion and not the school. With one family, it was always best to get dad on side first before having a joint meeting with both parents. And with another one, there was no point sending any letters or emails, ringing them up, get them in and talk to them through it 3 times usually. I could have left my replacement to it, but that wouldn't be fair. Then again, I was made redundant, so maybe it would have been. I regret not having those little records as time went by, and it's certainly something I would do in the future. If you've not inherited a nice little notebook with that kind of information, you're going to have to dig a little bit to find it out. Often it can come from TAs and teachers, but I did find the school secretary, a couple of cleaners and the attendance office were very good sources of gossip too. What do I mean by your systems? Well, I mean your identification of students who need support and should be on your register, and those who should be looked after by another department, how you record your SEN information and share that with the relevant individuals, including the staff in your school, how you engage with parents, and then how you keep an eye on things and review whether it is working or not. We can perhaps assume that your students have been correctly identified and have a history in a filing cabinet ready. It's up to you to ensure that the identification continues smoothly. Perhaps there's already a hearty referral process in place in your school that you just need to get your head round, whereas other SENCOs in different circumstances are having to create things from scratch. You have an equal challenge in trying to get to grips with what is already in place. Remember though that the SENCO role is now yours. And if the processes in place are not working for you, maybe you want to move to electronic rather than paper, then you are allowed to change them. You just need excellent people skills in persuading your team that change is good. I have assumed there are some pretty decent records in your school. If not, have a look at one of the other versions of this video to get some ideas. You need to decide if those records and systems will work for you. Whatever you finally decide to use to continue identifying your list of students, make sure your criteria are recorded somewhere. Partly so you can justify your decisions if you're ever asked, and partly as reference for yourself, because you will forget. Your local authority might provide SEN matrices which suggest whether a child should be on your SEN register, and I've included a couple of links in the description box below. But it is down to the school context, and you'll need to get to know your school in order to make those changes. Don't worry, the SEN register is fluid. You are allowed to make changes to it. Moving forward, decide what records you're going to keep and how. Our perfect predecessor has probably left us a decent system. If you don't already use it, consider EduKey's Learning Plans and Provision Maps as an electronic record-keeping system for your plans, profiles, provisions, along with automatic generation of reports, meeting logs, and, if you want, school robins and safeguarding aspects. I'm not on commission, but yes, I do actually work for them. Now you're going to have to win some hearts and minds, just like the other SENCOs. This might actually be more of a challenge in your school. Whereas in the disaster zone the staff may welcome someone who seems to vaguely know what they're doing, you've just stepped into the shoes of someone they respected and held in high esteem. There might be a few misconceptions to handle. As I said, I've never been in this position, but I did take over from a TA who'd been doing my role and who was best friends with the other two TAs in the team. In fact, she'd promised the job to one of those TAs when she retired. Of course, changes to legislation meant that that was no longer an option, and there was a great amount of resentment when I arrived to take over. In my case, I was walking into a disaster zone partly where they weren't even aware of the fires raging around them, but also one where the support staff, my TAs, absolutely detested my presence and the changes I made. Actually, I had a pretty tough first few years with those TAs. I certainly didn't make any friends, never mind win hearts and minds. I had to stick by my guns, and what I knew was right, and at times it was bloody tough. Anyway, you need to ensure the information about students is shared effectively with the staff in the school. Hopefully there's an excellent process in place for doing this, but again, if not, or if you want some fresh ideas, have a look at the disaster zone version of this video. Moving on from informing our staff, we also need to work with our parents. Now, this could be interesting. If the parents held the previous SENCO in high esteem too, then you're going to have to convince them that you are just as good, if not better. I'd like to think the SENCO had left a note about who they used to meet with regularly and why. Now, I can only speak from experience, but in those schools around me where the SEN department is considered outstanding and the teaching staff love their SENCO, I found parents were not always so enamoured. Words and phrases such as frosty, never has time for us, spouted a load of waffle, swallowed a dictionary, and stuck up bleep are common expressions. You don't want to be that SENCO, so make sure you're engaging your parents in conversations they understand. Give them the time they need, within reason, and make sure that anything you agree to, you action as quickly as feasible. You also need to build up trust. Don't make promises you can't return on. It is difficult sometimes, especially with what you have inherited. Your SLT might be looking to you as a new person to reduce costs, and whereas the previous SENCO had the luxury of spare TAs sitting on the top shelf of the store cupboard, you might be asked to claw back on this. What was previously possible becomes out of the question. So once you've managed to get your feet under the table at your school, you need to make sure you stay on top of the things you've set up. Just because you completed your keep or kick within your first few weeks in role doesn't mean that's done with. You need to go back, review, and repeat things regularly. If you've enjoyed this video, then please click like and subscribe, and if you haven't or had a look at my other offerings, then please do. You can even leave a comment. If you've not seen it, have a look at the first video in the series about being a sensible SENCO, along with the other videos I have planned for the series. There's over 70 of them at the moment. And here is what's coming up next. Followed by the first 40 odd titles of more than 70 that I have planned. Thanks very much for listening. Take care.